from the Dunkley electorate, this is the Paul Murray Live Pub Test.
Welcome to the Cheeky Squire here in Frankston. G'day everyone. Thank you very much for being here. Now, so often you hear in Australian politics about whether something does or doesn't pass the pub test. So, a big thing we've been doing for a long time now, multiple elections, a few by-elections thrown in there as well, is to take the show to a pub and let normal people from the electorate being able to ask whatever questions they want of the people who are running for office. Now, I love doing these shows because, again, it's not about me, it's not about us, it's about the people behind us asking the questions of the people who seek to represent them. But there is something a little different about this pub test compared to ones we have done in the past. And before I make the point about whom is not in the room, I want everyone to pay attention to what the Prime Minister had to say, and he's not the first and he won't be the last, to say something like this when they win an election.
And I can promise all Australians this: no matter how you voted today, the government I lead will respect every one of you every day.
Now, the reality of that statement, whether you agree with what the Prime Minister does after that point, it's always how a government starts. It always starts by saying that while you may not have voted for me, I will do my best to govern for all of you. And in the past, when we've done pub tests in absolute razor-thin seats in general elections or in state elections, you name it, most of the parties actually turn up, regardless of whether they think this is a home game or an away game. But tonight, in Dunkley, less than a week to go before a by-election, where the Labor Party has a 6% margin, the Labor Party is not in the room tonight. The Labor candidate has decided not to be in the room tonight. The Greens are not in the room tonight. There are more independents that are on the ballot, but we decided to keep it to those that we invited and the representatives of those parties we will get to in a moment or two's time. But I think it is important that we keep an empty chair, not because I expect them to turn up, but because I think it's a statement about how they view the concept of governing for everyone but not actually engaging with everyone when it comes to getting votes. Now, the reality is that if you back yourself to be a member of parliament or back yourself to want to be the government of the day, you should be willing to turn up anywhere to state your case. The fact that they are not willing to do so, I hope, matters to the people who will make their decisions in the next few days in early voting and on Saturday. Now, one of the reasons why the Labor Party didn't turn up is because I was going to ask the Labor candidate about her comments about those who voted no to the referendum last year. Now, while she wasn't absolute and saying it about every no voter, we can pretty easily see what the current candidate, potential Member of Parliament, says about an electorate that voted 56% no. I feel so many heavy emotions because of the display of what I can only describe as the worst of white privilege in the country. Dunkley voted 56% no. The candidate who at that point in time didn't think they were going to be a candidate for Parliament was just mouthing off with the minority of the country because they didn't like what the majority of the country did. That person is now trying to win the votes of an electorate that voted 56% in the fashion that she didn't want to. Did they display a white privilege? I can't ask her that question because, of course, she's not here. Perhaps another reason why the Labor Party is not here tonight and their preference buddies, the Greens, is because a new opinion poll popped up today, and it is the first to show the Liberal Party potentially winning this seat on Saturday. Now, this poll was put out by the YouGov people, and they were able to show that the Liberal Party on two-party preferred is currently leading 51 to 49. Now, this is different than other polls which have been around a bit earlier in the campaign that suggest that Labor would hold on to the seat. How big a margin? Well, of course, we'll all learn about that together. But it also comes on a day, as we discussed last night on the show, where the great assumption of the wankers in Canberra and the bubble within the bubble that is the media that talks about politics is that something magically changed for the Prime Minister and his government because they decided to move around who did and who didn't get this much or that much of a tax cut. In fact, even left-leaning polls are saying there is no bounce. There is no bounce after that decision. There's no bounce after the endless personal news that's been around when it comes to the Prime Minister. There's no bounce about whether he goes to someone more famous than him when it comes to a concert. We also see now that in news poll, again, no great change. Now, amazingly, David Crowe, the bloke who is to spinning in the media what Murpharoo is to spinning for the Prime Minister inside the office now, David Crowe from Channel 9. Well, he said this about the Prime Minister's plight in the polls. Anthony Albanese has been spending hours in radio and television studios trying to build a stronger bond with millions of Australians, only to hear a deafening silence instead of a roar of applause. And our mate Nathan Conroy, who will be here along with Rita Panahi and with Steve Price a little bit later in the show, well, we had a long conversation on air, and you remember this, about, again, the gulf between how the bubble deals with issues and how things go down in the real world. Because there was this number that came out from the Essential organisation, which showed 52% of Australians, half of the country, literally knows hardly anything or nothing at all about the changes to tax cuts, which, of course, is why the Prime Minister is planning to spend $40 million of your money on ads to tell everyone how amazing the tax cuts are. Well, for the people in Dunkley, can I tell you what the tax cuts are? The mean wage in this seat is $42,000. The weekly tax cut is $14 a week. Now, in the real world, people get paid weekly, fortnightly, monthly, and that's the reality of, in my view, the too little, too late tax cuts. The things that, in my view, prove there is no real understanding about cost of living. And despite the briefings that were made to Labor MPs via caucus, that this was the, and I quote, solution to cost of living, $15 a week if you're on $45,000, $22 a week on $60,000, $32, and then let's make it a month, $120 a month if you're on $100,000. Can I just ask this room of people, is $14 a week going to be enough to pay your bills? Do you get a sense that $15? Can I hear a $22? Can I hear a $44? That, of course, is part of the problem for the Prime Minister here, which is the bubble has made it seem like it was a slam dunk. Big decision, big win. Reality, half of people don't know. So it's up to the reality of what's going to turn up after the 1st of July in the 15th on their bank account. And the reality is that if it's $14 a week, you're not going to notice. And even the people on $100,000 are not going to notice $120 difference. Also, about the economy and cost of living, which is the number one issue in this election, as it will be in state elections, as it will be in a federal election, whenever that is to be, I want you to pay attention to a person representing the organisation called Judo Bank. They were on with Ross Greenwood this afternoon. Because, again, the Canberra bubble and the bubble within the bubble will tell us inflation, all good, all done, cost of living, not a problem, it's all getting better. Well, have a listen very carefully to what he has to say about why the reality is nothing's changed since last year.
Every business I speak to this year, end of last year, cost pressures are not abating at all. And of course, that is going to maintain pressure on them to pass it on to final prices, i.e. inflation, so long as they can. And that's all going to be a function of the health of the economy.
So there's a risk of higher rates, but your base case is still that rates fall later this year?
Very close to calling for a rate hike probably in June. It won't happen quickly, but they may get dragged back into another 50 to 100 points of rate hikes middle of this year.
50 points. Remember, the general way these things go is 0.25, 0.25, 0.25, 0.25 to get to 1%. He thinks it could end up being 2 of those interest rate rises, or if they do it at the same pace, it could be another 4 of those interest rate rises because the costs to companies have not changed. The Prime Minister may desperately want cost of living to have gone away, to have changed, but the practical reality for people, especially in places like Dunkley, that's about as normal Australia as it gets, well, this again is part of the political equation that we go into when it comes to Saturday. And also, if there was about to be another 1% increase or 0.25 increases over the next few months, Well, of course, that's going to add to the total amount of money that you've already had to find after a dozen interest rate rises, the elbow dozen of interest rate rises that have been there since he became Prime Minister. And the sky was falling in when it was one interest rate rise under the last mob, who of course got turfed. Well, what should happen when there's been 12? Well, of course, they've rigged the Reserve Bank so they won't make that decision again. Well, here is the truth. In Dunkley, 41% of all of the houses, all of the properties, all of the units, everything you can see around here is currently being paid off with a mortgage. That's 6% higher than the national average. Put simply, more people are paying off a mortgage here than in other parts of the country, many parts of the country. And right now, if you have a $500,000 mortgage, you've had to find an extra $14,500 compared to what you were paying before this current mob became the government. Most people are in and around $750,000. So where did $21,000 come from? Does $14 a week fix a $21,000 problem? Now, I was garbage at maths at school, as dumb as a brick in any of those houses. But I can work out there's a lot of 14s you've got to add together to get to $29,000 that somebody on a $1 million loan is having to find to pay as a result of interest rates. That suggestion is that even if the Reserve Bank slowly started to cut things, it wouldn't be this year at all. It might be halfway through next year, and even then, you'll still be paying 75% of the extra since this government came to power. So again, the bubble has its view. The pub test, I think, may have another. We see what happens when it comes to Dunkley in a couple of minutes' time. But let's just focus in on something we can all agree on. Greens have no idea what they're doing. Now, a perfect example of this, as we've seen before, is that they want to introduce new super profit taxes on businesses that have a turnover of $100 million or more. Now, remember, turnover is not profit. Turnover is the amount of money that comes into your business, but of course, the cost of doing your business. If you have money left over, that's what's profit. But the Greens say you should be taxed for what comes into the till as opposed to anything you need to do with the money that is in there. Well, interestingly as well, they want to move to a position where it's 100% net zero within 10 years' time. Think of all of the changes that come with that. On top of that, the Greens have come up with a spectacular idea today, which is that they would like to put a tax that will raise between $1.2 and $1.7 billion on the banks of Australia. They think they've found some fine print in the laws that were in and around the GST from a generation ago that means states are able to keep some of the taxes going that we were promised were wiped away. This plan to put even further financial pressure on major business in Victoria, on top of what the state government is already currently doing when it comes to everything from property taxes to mental health levies, of course, makes it even more bizarre here. But don't forget, this is the political party that also believes that government should set the price for how much stuff is at the supermarket. These people have no idea what they're doing. So between you and I mean that to everyone in the room, I don't care what you do on Saturday, but can you put the Greens last, please? Just put them last. We don't need that crazy anywhere. Meantime, an interesting fight that is happening in and around, to be honest. I don't put too much stock into all of this when left takes on left, but apparently there's a big fight coming in the Senate when the people who the government need to pass anything through the parliament, which is, of course, the Greens, as well as old doormat Dave Pocock. Well, the housing policy and the next version of that, which is about to be discussed by the Senate, the Greens are saying that they're not at all planning on passing it at this stage unless there's major changes to negative gearing. This is noise, nothing will happen. However, if the government wants to play with negative gearing because they think the tax cuts that half the country have no idea about, and when they finally learn will go, $14 in Dunkley, they may well end up walking away from any idea that the Greens would need there. But there is one other fight that's worth watching here, which could see the Greens getting more power, particularly in the south coast of New South Wales. You see, this is a map of areas from Wollongong and down in New South Wales where there's planned for offshore wind farms. Now, despite the fact that they demand we must be net zero by in the next 10 years, the idea of ruining the planet to save the atmosphere may run into a few problems. with apparently angry voters who have long-term voted Labor in that part of Australia now planning to maybe go all the way to Green, or potentially jumping into an area where they could end up voting for local independence. Now, I predict this could be a problem for the Labor Party into the future. Remember, this next election is not about whether the Liberals gain power or not. The Teals is too tough a block. It's about majority government for Labor or minority government for Labor. And Labor only has a couple of seats as its majority, hence why what's going to happen here in Dunkley matters as a forerunner for what happens at a federal election, either towards the end of this year or, as the Prime Minister tells us, and we can trust his word, right, that it will be next year. Well, apparently, independence may well be the place where a lot of Labor voters may end up going, particularly in Western Sydney. Watch this space, particularly at not this election, but the next election, when there'll be 24-hour noise over Western Sydney that often votes Labor. But of course, the good dears who live in Albo's electorate, well, they get to have a curfew, don't they? Now, finally, I want to talk about America and American politics here, because on the weekend, the CPAC convention took place. This is the most MAGA of MAGA events, where, among other things, the President of Argentina got to hug the potential future and beloved former President of America. Have a look at this for an outsider's wet dream. Have a look.
President! Oh, to meet you. This is a very big pleasure to know you, President. It's an honor for me. Thank you for the work for me. Oh, no, I'm very happy. You are very generous to me. Thank you very much. It's a very big pleasure. You are doing a great job.
He looks so comfortable, doesn't he, as he's being... I'm not a hugger. I'm Trump. I'm not a hugger. But anyway, an Argentinian cuddle came his way. But of course, it doesn't matter because Russia's interfering in everything.
There is a history here in presidential elections by the Russian Federation, by its intelligence services, and there's plenty of reason to be concerned. And this is not about politics. This is about national security. It is about a foreign country, a foreign adversary seeking to manipulate the politics and democracy of the United States of America.
And finally, I hope you've had your dinner. If not, get ready for it all to come up at once, because according to a new book that is all about Jill Biden, the First Lady, the President of the United States says a healthy sex life is a key to a good marriage. So all the time we've been watching the leader of the free world falling down, falling up the steps, thinking, what a klutz, what a fool, what is he doing? Whereas when Jill sees it, this is what she's thinking. Let's get to the pub test right now, as we all settle down after that very sexy image. And Tom Connell is going to have a look at all of the data and all of the campaigning ahead of our pub test tonight.
Voters won't have the usual annoyance at being asked to go to the polls between elections. This by-election was triggered after the death of Peter Murphy, after a long battle with cancer. Early internal polls had Labor in trouble and possibly losing the seat. The government does appear to have stabilised, and the 6.3% margin should be enough for Labor to hang on. Published polling has Labor ahead 52 to 48%. For Anthony Albanese, it's all about the Stage 3 tax cut changes. 87% of Dunkley voters are better off initially under the changes, so if it's not popular here, where will it be?
Why has Peter Dutton had 3 different positions on tax in just 7 days? Like wanting a snap election, then changing his position on that, but refusing to reveal whether the coalition would repeal the changes. Then changing his position on that, but still not saying what his own cost of living plan is. He's trying to hide the fact that underneath it all, he has no plan.
Peter Dutton will be highlighting those changes are a broken promise. He also has a lot at stake. This is the outer suburban demographic he thinks he can win over to help tip Labor out of office.
After a year focusing on Labor's $400 million failed voice referendum, Australia's inflation is higher than every major advanced economy. The cost of food is up, electricity is up, gas is up, And after 12 interest rate rises under Labor, interest rates and rent rises are at the highest levels in over a decade. This by-election won't change the government, but you can send Labor a message.
It's worth noting Dunkley was a Liberal seat before it was won by Peter Murphy. This is not Labor heartland, so the seat is up for grabs. Recent by-elections show anything can happen. For Labor, Fadden was a swing against the government and Aston a big swing to government. For the coalition before that, Groom a swing against government, Eden Monero a small swing towards. And then going back to 2015, the last time a sitting member died, Canning swung hard against the Liberal government. There's a lot of talk about average swings against governments in by-elections that voters usually send a message. So, is that true? Going back to 2009, the average swing is only 0.7%, but a lot of those were from Section 44 issues not seen by voters as a normal by-election. So, strip them out, the average swing is bigger at 1.4%. And then, if you take out Aston, which was a massive swing to government during its honeymoon period, we get to what is perhaps a more realistic average of 2.7%. So, a swing much more than that will have Labor worried, but much less, and Peter Dutton might have his own concerns.
All right, thank you, Tom. Now, we're about to get into the pub test. No more mucking around. Here are our candidates representing the Liberal Party, the Libertarian Party and the Australian Democrats. We will get to all of them in a moment's time, along with everyone ready to ask a question. But we're ready for a pub test here in Dunkley. Right after the break here on Paul Murray Live. Thanks for watching this very special Monday night. Welcome back to the Cheeky Squire here in Frankston, which is in the heart of the seat of Dunkley. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce our candidates that are here to take questions tonight. Nathan Conroy is representing the Liberal Party. Kristen Abrams is representing the Libertarian Party, and Mackenzie Heath is representing the Australian Democrats. As I mentioned just a few times, Labor and the Greens are not here. A round of applause for your candidates first. A little later, Steve Price, Rita Panahi and Stephen Conroy. But our very first question, it comes from none other than the lovely Nina. Nina, good evening. What do you want to ask our people? You've got about a minute to answer, not everyone on every question, but welcome to television.
Thank you, Paul. I was actually going to originally ask my question to the lady in red, but she's missing in action. So I've now chosen to direct my question to Heath Mackenzie, the Australian Democrat. Please explain what processes you would implement to reduce the high cost of living that has now created such a homelessness and plagued Dunkley.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I've lived here for a long time and I can see that it really is impacting people. So the Democrats are going to this election with a policy that we will raise the tax-free threshold to around 45K. That's a really important one. As you mentioned, Paul, earlier, that's around about the median income in this electorate. So that's going to give some pretty good relief. We've seen some reports in the last week around the supermarkets and the damage that's doing. I think our government and our major parties need to work pretty hard to bring a big stick to the supermarkets and to Bunnings and others to make sure that we're not paying too much. I deal with farmers for work. At the other end of the supply chain, they're getting a pretty rough deal as well. I think we really need to work hard on the supermarkets to make sure they're not taking too much of that. They're entitled to make a profit, but I think they might just be, taking a bit too much at the moment.
Inside a minute. Good answer. I like it.
Thank you.
All right. OK, we'll get another question up in a second, but I'll ask you, Nathan, again. Cost of living, doesn't matter where you go. A1 issue. What's your plan for it and how does it help Dunkley?
Look, thank you, Nina, for your question. And cost of living is the number one priority. People are choosing between bills and food, and the Albanese Labour government are hiring 10,000 bureaucrats in Canberra. We should be funding doctors, nurses, mental health practitioners right here. We need sensible immigration policy to make sure. And we need to make sure that we have a sensible immigration policy that doesn't put a burden on our housing. Because right now, we have a cost of living crisis, a health crisis, and a housing crisis. And something needs to be done. And I believe the people of Dunkley are going to send a message to the Albanese Labour government on March 2nd.
All right, Kristen. Because it is the dominant issue, I've got to get your position as a Libertarian about cost of living and the role that government would play in it. I know asking a Libertarian that question could lead to a 3-hour answer, but do your best with a minute.
I'm not your standard Libertarian, Paul.
Good work.
But in terms of cost of living, we consistently see people talk about the duopoly of Woolies and Coles, but there's another duopoly that's the problem here, and that's the two-party preferred system, that is the Labor and Liberal governments that continue to try and fix symptoms when we actually have a larger problem, and the larger problem is their consistent government price gouging. So what we plan to do to fix the cost of living is cut fuel excise tax. The government has previously recognised that fuel excise tax is a direct contributor to cost of living when they cut it through the pandemic, and we're saying we need to cut it again. We know that truckers keep Australia going, and absolutely, let's look at real solutions, not just appeasements with benefits here and benefits there. No, we want a long-term solution to a long-term problem that just continues to get worse. So in terms of the Dunkley electorate, I understand that these people are going to vote appropriately and send a message to both parties, Labor and Liberal, that what they're doing for cost of living is not enough.
Good stuff. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right, Lisa, lovely to see you. Thank you very much for coming along. Lisa, your question, who would you like to direct it to?
Just the panel in general. It's based on the illegal detainees that were released last year by the High Court into our community. Some of these people are known to the authorities for their past actions of murder, rape and paedophilia, but were released anyway. Some of the detainees have already reoffended. When are we going to take this a little bit more seriously before someone really gets hurt?
Okay, Nathan, I'll start with you.
Thank you for your question. There is 149 detainees within our community now. There is people out there that are dangerous and are criminals. And the Labour Party, the Anthony Albanese Labour government, hasn't applied for one detainee to be locked up. Liberals have always been strong on border protection, immigration and crime. And we put the security of our community and our country first, always.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Debbie, I'll get you to step up as our next question. But to both of you, this issue is one that I certainly notice plenty of posters around. So, again, to the rest of the panel, your thoughts on the people who have been released, well, the way they've been released by the government, but ordered by the High Court. What would be your suggestion of where to from here?
Oh, look, as we can see, we're not great at dealing with criminals who were born here. So this is no great surprise, but we've got to understand that I believe in this case, these people have done the crime, done the time. You can disagree with the umpire's decision if you'd like, but ultimately this ruling's been made. But yeah, I think this, and I've heard Nathan's comments. We like to get flared up about this. I think we need to understand that we've got a broader problem around crime and how we deal with it. We don't know in our country whether we're doing it for punishment, rehabilitation or what. So singling this issue, it's a little bit dangerous, but certainly we need to look really closely. This can't be easy to find out exactly what these people did wrong.
Yeah, all right. Kristen, I'll get you to hold because I do want to get through other questions here. We've got Debbie here. Hello, Debbie. Lovely to see you. Thank you for coming along. Shorter and fatter in real life, but that's okay. All right, so what's your question to the panel?
It was actually for the Labor lady, but she's not here.
Empty seat, baby.
The Labor candidate said that the Voice result was the worst kind of white privilege in this country. Seeing that 56.85% of Dunkley voted no, do you share her view?
All right, Kristen, I'll start with you. You're not the Labor candidate, but what do you think of what the Labor candidate had said?
Well, I'm not sure if anyone in this room is colourblind, but I didn't go to a private school. I didn't grow up in, a well-to-do family either. So I don't identify as white or privileged. And in terms of voting no in the referendum, I did vote no in the referendum, and that's because the pandemic showed us that we can't trust the government of the day to have an open ticket to our constitution. So I did vote no. I don't identify as white or privileged. And if a Labor candidate has such a problem with white privilege, she's more than welcome to vote for me.
Nathan, obviously the candidate's not there to say that I didn't really mean it, this, that and the other. What do you think of what a potential MP has said about their own electorate?
Look, 56% of Dunkley voted no. I respect every single person who went into that ballot box. But what is happening is this Albanese Labour government are creating a division within our community. And I respect everyone who voted, but instead of spending $400 million on a divisive referendum, we should be putting it into the cost of living relief, things that actually matter, because we have a cost of living crisis, housing crisis, and a health crisis.
All right, you're watching the pub test here in Dunkley. It is locals getting the chance to ask some of the candidates what they consider to be the major issues. Mark, nice to see you, mate. Up the Saints?
Up the Saints, yeah.
All right. Well,
this is the bench up there. I'm used to being in court.
On which side I won't ask.
Nuclear power. The block on nuclear power should be dropped, yes or no?
Okay, Mackenzie, let's start with you.
So our party president, it was part of the panel that put the block on back in the day. This comes up all the time with nuclear power. I can tell you it doesn't matter what the parties think, nuclear power won't be built here because there's no one that's going to build it. It's too expensive, and once you've finally built it, the power that it generates is too expensive. We're sitting here talking about the cost of living, and we're talking about rattling out this great big mythical beast that's going to give us power that's way more expensive than renewables. It doesn't matter what any of us think. The private sector are not going to build it.
I won't go and argue with him.
That's rubbish.
Okay, why?
They can build a power generator on the site of an existing steam coal-fired unit, no extra wiring to go in, it connects straight in, or if you want to be quick, you could put a nuclear power generator in, which is the same as a boiler, but it runs on nuclear, and the waste out of that is very, very minimal.
So why aren't they doing that all over the world in great numbers?
They are. They're doing it all over the world.
In great numbers?
They're doing it all over the world.
All right, well, you can come back and argue with Nathan Conroy later, because I think that'll be fun to watch. Thank you, guys. We'll have a little more. Keep it going. Plenty more action from the pub test here in Dunkley. Straight after the break, you're watching Sky News Live. Thanks for doing it. Welcome back to Dunkley. That's the federal seat. Frankston is where we are right now. And we're here. Oh, thank you very much. That's very nice. We're here at the Cheeky Squires. It's nice to get a little chant like that. I do appreciate it. We're here with several of the candidates who will be putting themselves forward on Saturday in the by-election that is here. Of course, representing the Libs is Nathan Conroy. We've got Kristen Abram from the Libertarian Party, and also Mackenzie Heath from the Australian Democrats. The Labor Party and Greens chose not to be here, but thankfully we've got George, I think, who's got a question now. Come on over, my friend. What do you got?
Very grateful to be here, Paul. Thank you. As both a potential federal member and a local voice for the seat, what is your perception on what some deem in the media is an out-of-control youth crisis occurring in various parts of our country? Do you believe this is so or otherwise?
Okay. Nathan.
I grew up in social housing, George, knowing the most disengaged youth, good things and bad things. And what we need to do is we need to spend more money and proactive initiatives and programs to make sure that our disengaged youth are not targeted on the streets by crime gangs and organisations that have prey on their vulnerabilities. But what we need to do as well is hold this state and federal government to account. They want to increase the age of criminality from 10 to 14. And all that's going to do is set a green light for these organised gangs to prey on our most vulnerable people in our community, and that is our young.
All right, Kristen?
While I don't identify as white or privileged, I definitely identify as the youth of today. And the reason I am standing for Dunkley is because my future is something that looks grim. And in terms of the future that I want for my children and for myself, I have to stand up and I have to make a change. So we are the first generation after World War II to have it worse than our parents. And why wouldn't the kids of today that don't want to be stuck in the rat race, that are constantly trying to keep a roof over their head and constantly trying to, feed themselves and be stuck in this consistent circle of government price gouging, look at their options and go to crime? We need to make a better future. We need to make a more prosperous Australia. We need to ensure that the youth of today want to contribute to Australia by giving them the opportunities, because right now their opportunities are stifled. So yes, I do believe that there is a youth crisis, And I have chosen to go down this path to fight for my future. Not everyone is given the same opportunity as me, and I'm out there fighting for them too.
If you don't win the election, can you come back as a panellist on my show? You're very good. You're very good. Mackenzie?
So I wonder how many people here have said the words, oh, where are their parents? You know, when you hear about these crime sprees and the young people. Now, youth crime's nothing new, but we've been talking about a cost of living crisis. People are doing it tough. A lot of these people might come from single-parent households, and there's a fair chance that parent's working 2 jobs just to get by. So, as I said, youth crime's nothing new. Yes, we need to come up with new ways, as Nathan, I think, said, you know, around engaging these kids and providing positive role models for them. But let's also understand this is a bit of a side effect of the current economic situation.
Good stuff. All right. Hello, lovely to see you. All right, we've got Trudy here. Trudy, what's your question?
As president of the Frankston Brekkie Club, I've witnessed since the 2022 federal election, families and our less fortunate people in Carrum Downs and Frankston North are struggling to survive, let alone thrive. I want to ask you what you'd do if you're in Albo's shoes right now.
Right. Nathan, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Judy. Look, since 2022, people are worse off under this government. It's simple facts. Food banks in Frankston North, Carrum Downs, the Community Support Frankston are at record levels. More people are becoming homeless since I came to Australia now than ever before. When mortgage rates are through the roof, 12 in the last 12 months, or since the current government. And then you have electricity, gas, everything going up. People are hurting. As I said earlier, people are choosing between bills and food. And people in Mount Eliza and Frankston South are now seeking help at food banks. And instead of spending $14 million advertising tax changes, we should be putting into the most vulnerable people within our community.
Thank you. Kristen, I'll ask you the same question here. It's an extension in and around cost of living, but yeah, what's your answer?
There's no denying that there is a homelessness crisis down on the peninsula and that there are people struggling to feed themselves. There was actually people sleeping rough at Oliver's Hill, and just after the pandemic, the council told them to move on. Imagine that, the council telling them to move on rather than looking to help them. And Nathan's completely right that there is, the food banks are out of control at the moment. There is one charity in Seaford at the moment that is feeding about 1,500 people a fortnight. What are we doing in terms of ensuring that the homelessness and the cost of living is at a better place for us to ensure that we're taking care of our most vulnerable? And the Libertarian Party have solutions to those problems. We're not fixing the symptoms, we're fixing the problem. And that is by cutting fuel excise, that is by raising the tax-free threshold, which is actually quite similar to his policy, raise it to $45,000 and have a flat 20% tax on that. We reduce the cost of taxes that end up on our groceries, our clothes, all of the other goods, and we will see that everyone in our community, as well as Australia, will thrive.
All right, thank you. All right, Darren, I'll get you to ask a question, or I'll get you to ask it to Mackenzie first, and then we'll work our way around.
Okay, well, this question is to the whole panel. And I guess one thing, congratulations, guys, and the best of luck on the weekend. We've heard about quite general aspirational ideas about how we can address and help Dunkley. What I'm interested in is if you're successful on Saturday, what will you take to the Parliament that really addresses some of the nuanced issues in Frankston and it's directly focused on Dunkley rather than a more general and national approach to the cost of living?
You want me to go first? Yeah, so one thing that I think really needs addressing is gambling reform. I think pretty broadly there was a lot of support for Peter Murphy as a great local member doing good work in the community. Now, her legacy is some of the great work she did around gambling reform. That's currently sitting on Albo's desk gathering dust. 31 recommendations, ready to go. He's talking about consultation now. It's ready to go. It needs to happen. So much money out of our community gets ripped out and goes to the operators of pokies and to sports betting agencies. That needs to happen really quickly. So that's one of the nuanced approaches.
Good stuff. All right, thank you very much. All right, sadly that's it for questions, but I want to give you all a chance to give a final pitch here about the way that it works. We'll start again. You get to go straight from answering to a final pitch. Give us the 30 seconds of why we're going to vote Australian Democrat on Saturday.
Look, I think if you look at the current political landscape, Paul, there's a lot of people standing on either side just shouting at each other. We've seen that at the pre-poll booths over the last few days, and I've been really frustrated to see that. What the Australian Democrats offer My sister actually coined the phrase the sensible middle as she's handing out how to vote cards at the polling booth. We just need someone in the middle with a rational voice to take the sting out of all these arguments and just come at it from an evidence-informed point of view. And we just really need to get some sensibility, political accountability. These, I hate to say it, but the Liberal and Labor Party, they're just all about self-interest. We need someone in there to keep the bastards honest, as the saying goes.
All right, round of applause for the Australian Democrats. Mackenzie Heath. All right, Kristen, the Libertarian pitch, go.
As a Libertarian candidate, I understand that the two-party preferred system and Labor and Liberal have put us in this situation. I am fighting for my future. I am fighting for your children's future and my children's future. I want to ensure that we have a prosperous Australia, that we are thriving, that we are not consistently price gouged by the government, and we are able to enjoy each other's company. We're not relying on social divisiveness perpetrated by Labor and Liberal. We are one community, we are one Australia, and I want what's best for our community.
All right, good stuff. Thank you. Nathan, what's the Liberal pitch for Saturday?
Over the past few weeks, we have been speaking to people right around the electorate of Dunkley, and people are hurting. Cost of living is out of control, housing is out of control, and health is out of control. We have crises in all these three different things. People are struggling right now, as I said, Paul, choosing between bills and food. I'm going to take the fight to Canberra because we need to send Labor a message, because we don't need a $14 tax break in 5 months' time. We need cost of living relief now. We need cost of living relief. We need community infrastructure. Metro Melbourne and Geelong. People are going to Geelong for the first time. We want to put Frankston City and Mornington Peninsula on the map. We need to build more infrastructure, not less. And his government has cut $3.9 billion from Victorian infrastructure, and we need more infrastructure, not less. As our community is growing, we need to put Frankston City, Mornington Peninsula on the map.
Good stuff. Thank you very much, Nathan. Please keep it going for all of our candidates. Thank you for being part of it. So, they mentioned the pre-polls. That's where I was today. And I didn't ask them which way they were voting, but why. When did you make your decision?
Oh, probably when I was 18 years old. Does that help you?
You've been one way the whole way?
Yeah, I don't change my mind.
Look, the person I voted for, I've always voted for that party, so I knew. I always know every election, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah, I'm the same. Yeah.
Look, back in the day, years and years ago, look, I voted Labor, but just not now, not anymore. I'm done.
So, what was it about? What are the issues that made you help decide which way you go?
Cost of living, the main one in the area.
The things that mattered to me, I kind of went with that. So, community was number one for me, and cost of living was very close after that.
Issues-wise, what makes you vote the way that you vote?
I think I voted for people that supported our local area, like Frankston. That was the one thing that caught my eye.
Oh, definitely the cost of living. That's across, everyone's aware of affecting everyone. So if that got better, then that's what I'd like to see.
Do you believe that there's one side more than the other that's got an answer for that?
Oh, I think everyone's trying to probably come up with an answer. I don't think anyone has the right answer necessarily. I think it's something we'll figure out as we go along and as it evolves.
People are sick of governments, councils, whoever, just telling them what to do.
What's the most important thing that you think is about Dunkley, about what you would like to see come out of the election regardless of who wins?
That everyone's working together. I think that's more important than anything else.
On the polling booths, we will get to a real debate in a moment's time, but a little moment I have to apologise to the man I kept calling Mackenzie. His name is Heath. It is Heath Mackenzie from the Australian Democrats. I apologise. Quick break, back with more. A debate in the room. You ready for this one? It's going to be fun from Cheeky Squires in Dunkley. Stand by. Welcome back to Dunkley, but the finishing dessert here is going to be better than any red tulip after dinner mint, because this is the main game in many ways. None other than the man who's just been gritting his teeth the whole time, but Labor decided not to send anyone. Nathan Conroy, ladies and gentlemen. The Persian princess, the queen of the outsiders, 11 o'clock every night. Rita Panahi, you can see him on Friday night, but he's in for Andrew Bolt all week, the great Steve Price. And a reminder that on Saturday night, Steve's going to be part of the coverage, of course, sitting there in this booth and that booth and this early return. And I'm hearing all of this stuff. It's all fun to watch, and it's from 6 o'clock on Saturday night. All right, Stephen, why wasn't Labor here?
Look, Jody has been actually on the phone banks tonight, actually calling voters, talking to them direct, selling the message and chasing their votes.
Rita, should she have been here tonight?
That is the weakest excuse I have ever heard. So she doesn't want to be here to speak to a room full of locals, to a massive audience. She'd rather be calling individuals who don't want to be bothered at home.
She's chasing every vote.
So she's basically a telemarketer. Is that what you mean? You want us to elect a telemarketer?
That's what candidates do. They pick up the phone, they call people in the homes, and they have a chat with them.
All right.
As someone who doesn't like getting unsolicited calls, no, thank you. That's a good reason not to vote for her right there. Plus the fact that she called 56% of the electorate, she essentially labelled them as racist. She said they're suffering from the worst type of white privilege. It is just such a horrendous comment to make, and she needs to be here to explain it. She hasn't explained those comments or apologised.
Okay. So, Steve, I apologise for ever interrupting you, darling. You know that. Now, Steve, obviously, in terms of issues, we know cost of living is as big as it is. Albo thinks that the tax cuts is the beginning of a conversation of we get it. The reality is it doesn't kick in until July the 1st. However, the reason we're having the by-election is because of a popular local MP who passed away. Does that change what the result ends up being about whether it is about today's circumstances or the reason there's a by-election at all?
We all feel very sorry for the local candidate who passed away. We all say that, and that's just a fact. Yeah. But the people in this room tonight and the people who live in Dunkley are the best example I think you could get of aspirational, middle-class Australians who want the best for their families. That's who they are. And I know this area pretty well. I've been reporting for 50 years. I've done a whole lot of stuff in Frankston. Frankston's on the move. It's a place where people are going to want to come and live. And I just think that Labor, in particular Anthony Albanese, has misread this community completely. I mean, these people are having to pay a lot of money to fill their car up with petrol because a lot of them have to drive great distances to go to work. This is tradie heaven here. The tradies live in Dunkley. I mean, I see them on the road every morning at 7 o'clock in the morning. They're going off to work hard. They're not rich, they're not wealthy. They're just people who want a better life for themselves. I think a lot of people are going to be very surprised at what happens in here on Saturday.
I've got to say, Stephen, my sense of it, right, and obviously while I have ample guts, which help me come up with things, my sense is that this is closer than the 52-48 that we saw a couple of weeks ago. I'm not sure if it's 51-49 right now because of sample size, and we'll bore everyone with that. But is a win here, or it's the size of the win that matters? Like, how are we supposed to read what happens? And, I mean, obviously, as a Labor man, you want a win by one vote. Who cares? But what looks like a win in this place for either side?
Yeah, look, I think Peter Dutton's seen in the last couple of weeks the polls moving to him. The primary vote for the Libs in every single national poll is now well ahead of Labor. And that will give Peter Dutton a lot of heart for this contest. The poll, I agree entirely with what you're saying. It's a bit of a small poll to try and make a call, but I think it's narrow in that category 52-48, with Labor at the moment probably thinking it's marginally on the right side of the line. They would take that as a win. I mean, Peter had a really strong personal following. She proved that when she won the seat. It was a Liberal seat. It's never been easy to win this seat. Dunkley's one we've chased for years and years and years. And Peter was a fantastic candidate. It's a tragedy where it is. So I think that takes, that personal vote of Peter's is hard to transfer.
People in this room don't give a rat's about polls. They just want to be looked after by a government that cares about them. And I think they feel like they're being ignored completely.
I think to agree with you...
They don't care about polls.
To agree with you and disagree with you at the same time, Steve, frankly, I don't think the people in this electorate are fooled by a government of 9 years that did nothing. It supported the tax cuts. It's not putting forward a petrol tax cut. It's not putting forward any solution to any of their problems. It's just saying protest. OK, and that's fair enough. I'm not being critical of that. But it has no solid policies. It is put on the table to say, you're all going to be better off.
But
Not
sadly,
one
the
policy.
people in this room also had to put up with Dan Andrews for the last week.
Now, I know Steve well enough. I know Steve well enough that when he was driving here, he said, what's the one thing that'll automatically get the room on side? Too easy, Scott. I'm going to bang this big one. Anyway, well played. Rita, again.
Should we ask Steve, who's a very keen golfer, what are the chances of Dan getting membership at any Peninsula golf course?
None and zero. You're not at my club.
So Rita, again, you live in this part of the world. You understand Melbourne politics. Not this exactly Frankston, but you know what I'm saying. But also, you were out and about today talking to a whole bunch of people. The reality of politics is that as hardcore as we all are, and we all know how many grains of sand there are on the beach, it's compulsory voting, which is why FM radio appearances are also damn important. But also, it goes back to where I started the show. More than half of the country was telling a left-wing pollster just a couple of weeks ago, no idea about the tax cuts. So if the government's expecting that to be the circuit breaker, guess what? No one knows there's a circuit breaker.
No, and this room is very politically engaged. They know the issues, they know what they think. That's not the experience out there. And if you go out there and talk to people, so many of them barely know there's a by-election. They don't really know who they're backing, what their different candidate stances are. So there is a great deal of apathy out there. So you've got to factor that in. And when you've got a room like this who are a knowledgeable audience, that's not the experience out there. And that was certainly when I was talking to people today around Frankston Central and the train station. It was, yeah, it was. I actually
She's
took
being
some.
very polite.
Yeah, she's...
well, you'll see.
What, about Frankston train station or, yeah?
You'll see.
She didn't come here on the train, all right? We all know the Persian princess was carried here in a chariot of her own, and I was one of
the train wasn't even running today.
Yeah.
Well, I took out some A4 pictures of the Premier of Victoria, the Prime Minister, the Opposition Leader, Federal Treasurer, just to see if people recognise these individuals.
Anyone recognise Jacinta?
Barely anybody, and she's the Premier of the state. So that just shows you that people who are not politically engaged, they just don't give a stuff. Perhaps they vote a certain way because their parents did, or what they remember from school. But you can't discount that. And I think you touched on the fact that the local member here passed away. There was a sentiment again from people who said, you know, Labor have already won this seat at the last election. They deserve to hold it until the next. Now, that may not be a popular view, but it's an opinion that's prevalent out there, and it certainly will have some sort of a factor.
Yeah, I mean, again, why you have a by-election is always a bit indicative as to what might be the result. All right, we're inside our final minute here and we are eating into the late debates time, so they can take it off me at another point in time. But, Stephen, what of the attacks that are out there do you think is the most potent?
I think the Advance Australia ad is a strong ad. I don't agree with it. I don't think it's a fair representation of what's happened. This was legislation that was passed by Peter Dutton and the former Liberal government that the High Court knocked over. That's what caused those people to be in the community. Sorry, that's just actually a fact. Yeah, no, well, if you wanted to give them some money to go with keeping them in jail when you let them out, good call, because you'd been paying them compensation for holding them after the legislation that was holding them was knocked over in the High Court. But if you want to give them, $100,000 to add to the insult, to the injury, you go for it.
All right.
$100,000 check.
Oh, it's like state conference all over again.
So,
thank you very much, guys. I'm looking forward to this. We're going to have a massive punch-on in the car park later. We're going to be true Frankston locals by the end of it. Thank you very much, everyone. That's our podcast. Plenty more. Thank you, guys. Love you. Here's the late debate. Sorry for the extra time, but I think it was worth it.